This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, well, I'm going to call it to order. I'm going to call this Planning Commission meeting to order at 7 p.m. January 21st, 2021, first of the new year. Welcome, everybody. The role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, hearing examiner, or court. Not tonight. Tonight's meeting is held as a conference call to comply with the governor's stay home and stay healthy orders. Excuse me. We will follow the same procedures we use for our meetings at council chambers. We have a couple opportunities for public comment, though I don't see anyone who's not affiliated with the city. Mute your microphone when you're not chatting, I guess. You don't necessarily have to unless you're being noisy. We're being recorded. The proposed agenda is first call to order and citizen communications for items not on the agenda, agenda approval, consent items, which is just our minutes this evening. And then we have a discussion workshop, and then maybe some staff reports, and then we'll adjourn. Janice, would you mind calling the roll?
I would be delighted to call the roll. So,
thank you.
Certainly. Brian Matson.
Present.
Jason Lugo.
Present.
Sam Nigro. Tiffany Witten. Tel Jensen.
Here I am.
Thank you.
Okay, we also have Travis Goddard, our Community Development Director, Melissa Johnson, our Associate Planner, and Janice Fisher, our Permit Technician and Clerk. Thanks everybody for being here. So first up is citizen communications for items not on the agenda. I know it doesn't look like anybody's here with us, but just to make sure. No, nobody wants to. Okay, let's move on to approving the agenda. Just need a motion and second for.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Thank you, Brian. Jason, you feel like seconding that?
I second.
You know, you don't have to do whatever he says, Jason. You can, you know, if you don't want to, you don't have to.
Is that leading the witness? Is that, I don't know, maybe that's bad for him. Requesting a second. Anyway, you did it, so it's too late. So all those in favor of approving the agenda then? Anyone opposed? Okay, no one's opposed. So I think the motion carries.
Travis is getting arrested.
Oh no. Oh no. We need you, Travis. All right. Next up is consent items, which is approving the minutes. And
I move that we approve the minutes.
Fantastic.
I second.
Thank you both. Motion has been made and seconded.
It's like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah. Do we have any discussion on the minutes? We do, actually. We have some discussion. So, Brian, I think you heard this. Jason, maybe we were talking about this before you got here. We need to perhaps amend the minutes to include that the meeting occurred online as well as at the council chambers. So
I did not hear that. I had stepped away from my desk for a little bit. So I'm in favor with amending the minutes.
okay. So I think we need to make a motion for that amendment, right?
I move that we amend the minutes to reflect that they were held online instead of in council chambers.
Okay, fantastic. You can't tell, but I'm looking at you, Jason.
Second that.
Okay. Motion been made and seconded. Before we vote on that, is it just these last minutes, or is it the from previous meetings too? I guess we can address that after we approve this one.
Yeah, do this one first and then we'll go back.
Okay, great. In that case, what was I doing? We're taking a vote. Okay. Is anyone opposed to motion on the table to amend the minutes? No. Okay. That motion passes. The minutes have been amended. Now we still need to actually approve the amended minutes. So, is there any more discussion on that?
I move that Janice amends the minutes to say that they were held online, if they were held online.
We already did that. We just have to do that main approval. We'll get back to that, Brian. Thank you. Okay, so no more discussion. So let's take the vote on that too. Anyone opposed to approving the minutes as amended? No. Okay, motion carries then. Moving right along. Now, just staff, do we just kind of do the same deal? Maybe make a motion to approve or amend previous minutes, because I have not signed any in a while. So you're muted, Travis.
Yeah, I am. Yes, I think it would be best to go ahead and just say that someone moves to amend all of the appropriate minutes to reflect that they were held remotely as well as in person at council chambers. And that way we'll be accurate and everything, and I'll just make sure that those get corrected before you sign them. But I didn't want to correct it without approval. So thank you.
Okay, great.
I move that Janice corrects the minutes to reflect where we held the meeting at, or whether it was remotely. And in some cases, if a counselor came in, I think we had one where somebody came in.
I second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? No discussion. Let's go ahead and vote on it. Anyone opposed to amending the previous minutes? Doesn't look like it. Okay, so that motion carried too. Fantastic. Now that's kind of all our formalities taken care of, and we can move on to our discussion. I imagine somebody's got something to tell us about that.
Okay, so I guess that's me, sorry. And my mic is on, so you can hear me, right? Okay, so for Jason and Brian, who weren't here when we started our original discussion about code changes, we implemented a program called Retooling Our Code, or the ROC program. And we, as staff, write down anytime we come across a code section or a cross-reference or a spelling mistake or a grammar mistake, all the way up to major policy suggestions or ideas that staff or the planning commission or the public come up with. And it all goes onto this list that we call the ROC list. And every so often we will pull that list out when we have an opportunity to bring stuff before the planning commission. And what you have in this workshop attachment is a few of the issues that we had prepared and kind of in our pocket for discussion with the planning commission. And since we had nothing else on the agenda, we'd figure we'd come talk to you about maybe putting together a batch of code fixes and see if we can't pick a lot of low-hanging fruit and maybe some medium-hanging fruit to make some corrections kind of in the background of our normal workload. So that's the purpose of the Retooling Our Code program. And if you don't have any questions about that, we can kind of start talking about the issues that are likely to make the batch 3.
No questions.
Okay. So the first document that you have is a staff report that was prepared last week, and it's not complete of what's on the Retooling Our Code list. We'll get you the revised list. I'll email it to you because it's a long spreadsheet. But essentially there are 4 items which we can talk about today, and then there's some other follow-up that we'll add. The first item is a question about our commercial codes. In 2017, we adopted some changes to the Commercial 1 district, which is our downtown business core, that allowed for some residential uses, limited residential uses in the commercial zones, but the council was clear and the Planning Commission code changes were clear that they did not want ground level residential on Davidson or Gorig, because they wanted to keep kind of the downtown business core to be commercially, look like a commercial main street. And so there was a code change that went into place, and it encouraged residential and multiple different types of residential, but it didn't necessarily discuss the possibility of retirement homes or different housing types. And so we think that this is going to be a topic of discussion with the housing discussion that we should start having pretty quick, and whether or not retirement homes should be a component of a mixed housing or a mixed use development that includes commercial. So that's going to be before you. If you don't have any questions, I'll talk about the second one, which is also related to housing. No questions? Okay. So the second one is
Travis. Sorry, Travis, I'm late hitting my mute button. I just no residential on the first floor. That's a common requirement. I'm used to that. I had an instance recently, just something that came up, just I want you to be aware of, where it was a mixed use deal, and the applicant, it was for some of the residents it was designed for people with ADA issues, and they really fought me on that first floor no residential. Just something to be aware of. Anyway.
Yeah, and there is going to be a case that is at your Planning Commission meeting for review. It is a comp plan change, a zone change, a site plan, and a variance request, and that'll be in February. So you'll actually get to dive into this question as part of that project next month. So, okay. So that's why I don't want to get into the detail that's in the staff report, but it is part of our ROC package.
Okay, great. I just wanted to bring it up just to be aware of it.
Sure. And the second item on the list is very similar, because our industrial code allows for watchman and custodian dwellings in the industrial district. And this is kind of an outlier, because typically, I mean, it's not new, because you have like Burris Creek Mini Storage, the owner lives on site and he has storage units out back, and he is expanding his storage business now. And that's kind of a great example of how the watchman custodian or the project manager or the site manager can live on site. That's kind of an old school part of the code. But the issue that has come up, and that is there's a business in town where they have multiple sites for their business, and they'll have staff maybe from, I think it's Arizona, might come up and do very specialized work, and they're there for a couple days. And this business is large enough that they have empty space in some of their outbuildings. So they have been using those outbuildings as kind of a transient employee housing. So it's office space that was converted. And the fire district had actually happened to be going through the building and say, whoa, 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 these are fire building code related issues. And it led to the question of whether or not they need to do building improvements and whether it would be allowed by code, because technically they're not watchmen, they're not there for security or to clean the building. So what really does that use entail? And so staff is basically coming down, and Melissa had this idea of doing kind of a transient housing opportunity and limit it to employees on the building. So that's going to be coming for you to consider as well. So if you have any thoughts on that, we can do some research or incorporate your thoughts.
I have a couple thoughts. I don't know, I guess I'm always kind of thinking about how it's gonna, it seems like most businesses, if they needed to bring people into town for a little while, they just put them up in a hotel. And then we'd get a little bit of, hotel tax and from them. And that's kind of, that's one reason that it's nice to have, big businesses in town, because that happens occasionally. So I don't know, I guess I'm wondering, you don't want to like nickel and dime these folks for everything you can squeeze out of them. But I mean, this seems like we have hotels in town that, are more than adequate to meet that need. It seems weird to, kind of go out of our way to change our code to allow this thing that is not actually allowed, and that's, I'm not dead set against it by any means. It's just kind of what came to mind.
Yeah, and that was brought up as part of our conversation, and Melissa might want to weigh in on this as well. But yeah, we recognize that in this case, the question came down to, it started as a building and fire issue, and it may also end up being that the building conversion is cost prohibitive. You might be able to put employees up for years in a hotel once you start looking at the cost of converting office space to residential construction standards. And so we recognize that. But at this point, the argument that they're making in that is, if they built a dwelling, how would we draw the line between having their Arizona employees living in the dwelling versus transient housing? So it might just be an interesting discussion and it may not go anywhere, or it might be an interesting discussion that changes the code and they still don't build it.
Sure, yeah. It is interesting at the very least.
Melissa, you want to do the next two?
Sure. All right, the next section we'll be talking about is our architectural and site design standard. It's WMC 1736-130 subsection J. And we are suggesting this update on behalf of Public Works Department. Public Works has requested our help with the landscaping standards in the public right-of-way. Specifically, river rock is seen as a safety hazard by Public Works, especially in the highly commercial zone, C2. There's higher speeds of cars there. There's more passersby that might maybe kick the river rocks into the road. So they do not desire them in the public right of way. And it also doesn't quite match the aesthetic that we're going, like for the continuous aesthetic that we're going for in the highway commercial zone. So we can help them out in our community development department by writing specifically into our architectural and site design standards for C2 zones that river rock is not allowed. And while we're here in this section, there's a simple typo that needs correction. It starts out saying intent to maintain a continuous, safe, and consistent street frontage and character throughout the site and abutting public right-of-way. So just and needs to be changed to and in that sentence. And then in section 2 is where we can add clarification to drive home point about the river rock. It says, where required or proposed, street trees within the public right-of-way shall be spaced equivalent to 1 every 30 feet, and tree pits or 4 feet wide continuous planted area Tree pits may be planted or have pavers. And we'd like to add here, river rock may not be used for landscaping in the planting strip, just to add more clarity. And then all proposed planting activity shall comply with section 1228 woodland street tree standards. We've had some pushback recently, as some applicants have pointed out to us. Your code didn't specifically say no river rocks when the Public Works Department was reviewing a site plan or reviewing a right-of-way permit request. So this will help make it a little bit more clear by adding that in.
Was someone proposing 4 foot of river rock in the planter strip? Was that what they were proposing?
Yeah, it could just completely filled with river rock.
Okay. Yeah, I agree that's no bueno.
But their landscaping plan did not show rock. Their landscaping plan showed vegetative ground cover, and they're arguing that it's the equivalent.
Really?
I don't see how that's similar, but
I mean, something would grow there eventually.
Animal, mineral, vegetable.
I'm not totally. I mean, it seems totally reasonable. I'm just not. I'm confused about the safety hazard of. Like, in what situation are these rocks rolling into the road?
Well,
from people,
so our public works director brought up that there are a lot of people passing by in front of the trailer sales and in front of, or trailer depot and Verizon Redleaf, especially with the high school there. So there's a lot more people walking by on the sidewalk. So with the river rock there, she is especially concerned of it just being dislodged from people walking by, or for fun kicking the rocks, or dog walkers, just all kinds of high school students, I guess, is the main concern.
Somebody told them to go kick rocks, and they might take it seriously.
Well, and we have been inconsistent about this application throughout town because there are industrial developments where they've installed large crushed rocks, but we're talking large spalls as opposed to small river rock and different sizes of materials. And we may have to clarify and put some caveats on it that, you know, collectors and arterials, as opposed to small residential, you know, circulation roads and minor arterials, it might be okay in other districts, because the type of traffic you deal with on Dyke Access Road is significantly different from what you might deal with elsewhere in town. So
yeah, and I've seen river rock used very attractively in some situations.
Sure.
Especially, you know, mostly in combination with some plants. But
yeah,
you know, if somebody wants to build a nice rock garden in front of their yard, that seems fine. But yeah, this is just for C2, right?
That's correct. Yes, this is only landscaping in the C2 zone. And we do have. Sorry,
and I was going to say it also has to do with in the right of way, and the Public Works Director has the authority to approve or disapprove landscaping and installations in the right of way. And she wants us to add clarification so that she doesn't have to spend hours arguing with applicants, as opposed to she has the authority, she can say what she wants, just like future directors can.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe
this will help back her up.
Yeah, could you maybe ask her to just write us a brief blurb or something, or I mean, she doesn't want to come to the meeting, which I imagine she probably doesn't want to, but if she wants to come to the meeting, fine, and we can just ask her there. But if you could just a little blurb saying, you know, what she's worried about, what her concern is. I mean, you wrote the main idea, I think, but it's just, I don't know, this doesn't seem totally straightforward. Cool, thanks.
Okay, so there are some other issues that I wanted to talk to you about that are not necessarily in that packet, but Melissa, can you talk to them about the white paper
Sure.
for food.
Right. Okay. So we've also included a white paper for mobile food trucks, and this could likely become part of our Retooling Our Code project. So I've just written up a little bit of background information. Of course, food trucks have become increasingly popular throughout cities in our area, both as a dining option and also as a business venture. And as a city, we've been receiving more inquiries about people interested in opening up food trucks. And we've also, mayor and our city leadership has also become a little bit more interested in food trucks in Woodland. So this is just some preliminary research to start our discussion, and we'll see how we can include it in Retooling Our Code coming up. A major barrier to food trucks in City of Woodland is we don't define them at all in our zoning code yet. And that may just be because some of these code sections were written before food trucks became so popular. And since we have no definition, they're also not included then on any of our permitted use lists. It's made them tricky to permit. So my first suggestion would be to adopt a definition for mobile food truck, and that can be as simple as using L&I's definition. So they say it's a licensed truck or trailer from which food is prepared inside, served to customers outside. Food truck is no more than 8.5 feet wide and has at least one of the following: electrical system, water drain system, or propane gas system. So it's as simple as just adopting that in our definition 17.08 section. After that, we'll have to discuss where would we want to allow food trucks. That would be both which zones and then where specifically within the zones. They might be in private parking lot or maybe in public right of way. So for private parking lot, I've been finding as I've talked to applicants that are curious about opening food carts that the temp use permit's a little bit too short for their taste. It's 180 days, and the conditional use permit is a bit too expensive. That one comes in at $700. And often the operators of food trucks would like to vend from multiple locations. So then they're going to need multiple permits and multiple site plan reviews. That's been pretty cumbersome so far. So what I'm leaning toward right now is classifying mobile food trucks as a special use instead of a conditional use or a temporary use. We could create a new permit to go along with that. And or another alternative would be to have the property owner or the anchor business apply for the permit. And that way we could have one area of their property approved, and then they could use that space for various food trucks as they wish. So we could just do one site plan and then maybe multiple food trucks could use that. Two ideas that have come to mind so far. Then the other space that they often request to be in is public right-of-way. We don't allow that currently. Perhaps we could in the future. We would probably need to look into a parking permit program and work with Public Works to develop that together. So this is just scratching the surface primer. I'd like to know tonight your big picture feedback on food trucks in Woodland. Any zoning code suggestions you have that you'd like me to explore further and talk about next time, and anything that you've seen you think that's worked well in other cities, research you'd like me to further bring to you.
So
Right.
I'll weigh in on food trucks because I love food trucks.
Right.
You know, if I liked your idea about doing a site plan for a designated food truck spot within an existing property, like a business of some sort. Like I'm looking at your deal, and like you had mentioned Dale and Pacific Avenue right there by the Napa. Right now, I would like that. You know, that'd be kind of a good idea to permit that, like a food truck pod, right, as through site plan review. But I don't want to over-regulate it to the point of if you drive your truck somewhere and you park it for the lunch hour and then you drive it away, I don't know if we should be regulating that, right? You know what I mean? And on another idea I think is the public right-of-way could be problematic for depending on where in the public right of way for lots of reasons. And I don't know, and this is probably a question for the lawyers, but if something was to happen within the right of way that we're specifically allowing with a food truck, would we then be liable? That's just something to think about.
To clarify, what I meant about public right of way was street side parking.
But they're just going to be driving that away later.
Yep.
So it's kind of like first come to the parking spot, first serve, right? I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. But
yeah.
Well, and our public works
could be.
Our public works is also thinking in terms of vendors at the Horseshoe Lake Park. So, for example, those Hawaiian cones, snow cone machines at Horseshoe Lake during the summer on the weekend. Is that the kind of public space, or is that a good use of public space in our park?
I think so, but I'm partial to summer treats. But
This is an excellent discussion, by the way. A concern that I've seen in where it hasn't gone according to plan with food trucks is the power and hooking up to power generators. That's just a sloppy method of trying to do a food truck pod. Yeah, they've just created pollution and a lot of noise. But most of them, for the most part, are done right. But I've seen some where it's too loud to congregate and to enjoy your meal or snack. So
Yeah, across from my building at Portland State, there were some really nasty generators that were pretty obnoxious. So yeah, that's a really good point, Jason. Thanks. Well, I don't know. Seeing that steak burger truck is kind of I don't know, bittersweet maybe. I grew up going to Steak Burger in Hazeldale, which is now I think a Panera Bread, which I'm much less nostalgic about. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's generally good policy to not throw up roadblocks to small businesses that want to operate in town. But I also think we need to consider, if we allow a food truck to just go in and we don't regulate them at all, that's potentially taking business away from our brick and mortar restaurants that already exist. Which doesn't mean we don't want to allow them from my point of view. It just means like those folks pay taxes, for the privilege of operating in town. So just kind of, in an effort to have an even playing field. I think we should make it easier on our, people to start a brick and mortar restaurant in town as well. That's a different discussion, obviously, but I think those, they're all kind of tied together, right? If we're making, I think food trucks are great, and I think we should encourage them if we can, and definitely find a way to allow them in our code. But the one downside about them is that there's no, investment in town, right? They can just pick up steaks whenever they want, and that's both good and bad for us, right? Because it's a low barrier to entry, and we want that. And we want people to experiment and try stuff and do things on the cheap. I think that's great. But I think we also want to reward the people who do make that investment to make a business permanently in town.
Yeah, and I think one of the opportunities that we could look at and try and encourage them to partner with a local business, like the site-specific site plan is a great idea. Like, for example, Spruce, which has a ton of beer choices, but a rather limited menu. If they could get a rotating food truck out front and partner with them so that every Friday and Saturday night there's a different food vendor, it might be a boon to their business because now you can have your favorite beer with Italian or pizza or burgers or grilled cheese, depending on what day of the week it is.
That's
Right.
great. So would that look like having, like there being an option to have a local sponsor of some sort? Is that kind of?
Yeah, and the Fat Moose might be another example where, if they can work out a partnership between the two of them, I could see that they might want to have one in their lot as well.
You're
So
saying their chicken strips didn't quite do it for you. Is that what you're saying?
not the day after their fish special, because then all the chicken tastes like fish.
We love our local businesses, Fat Moose. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think this is really good stuff and good to be thinking about.
She also, Melissa, when she prepared this on the second to last page or page 7, she also included the idea of parklets, which is letting businesses, especially during COVID-19, and it's unlikely to go away, that if we could allow them to kind of grow out into the street. You're starting to see this in Vancouver a lot. That's another great way for us to encourage that kind of symbiotic relationship between the small local restaurant and bar and this idea of outside dining.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic use of street space. Yeah, I'm very, very excited about that sort of thing. They're definitely a wide spectrum of executions on those. Some of them are pretty horrendous to look at, but some of them are really, really well done.
Yeah, good job, Melissa. I like this.
Good. Well, thank you for the feedback. So I'll get back to you with some ideas for addressing generators and pollution. Let's see, more about public right-of-way, and I can include some economic analysis for impact of food trucks on brick and mortars. I've seen some research on that, and I also saw some examples of applications that had space for the adjacent owner to give permission for a food truck to be nearby, so I can further explore that idea. All right, so thank you.
Great.
Okay, some other issues that we have been wrestling with, and that is street naming, specifically ways. We have Howard Way and Rose Way is a new one that's coming in the industrial district, and they are both north-south corridors. But when you actually look in our code, it says a way is east-west and a place is north-south. And so we also have the situation in the city where we have a lot of roads that should be streets, and they're county roads and city streets. So the question is, do we reevaluate our code for naming purposes? Or do we upset everybody in town by changing their addresses so that the police and the fire department can actually find them without having to Google the call every time they respond to a request for service? So that's kind of hanging out there. That might be fun, or it might be pulling teeth.
I can confirm that when you change people's addresses, they hit the roof. I can confirm this. Luckily, Woodland isn't that big that, that you're really going to get too lost, right? I mean, the local emergency services probably aren't going to get lost in Woodland, and that's a good thing.
But what kind of is frustrating to staff is the amount of inconsistencies. Almost the entire town is inconsistent with the code. And so at what point do we just not apply it to new development and, let the tail wag the dog? Or do we actually try and fix the other half of the dog that's not going in the right direction with the tail?
Travis, I don't know what you're talking about.
Do Do you have a hand in this, Jason? You name these streets?
No, but a lot of experience. A lot of experience.
Yeah, Bart Stepp was, that drove him crazy. I think he's probably the reason we have the naming conventions in the code to begin with. They may not have
Yeah,
been
and
good.
even if we hold to the code with no changes from this day forward, it doesn't fix the problem, because nobody knows which is correct and which isn't. The other issue that we are wrestling with, and this isn't necessarily for the Planning Commission, and that is the building and the fire code is switching over February 1st from the 2015 building code and fire code to the 2018 building and fire code. And so technically it's Title 14 of the Woodland Municipal Code, and the Planning Commission doesn't have authority over that. But we just wanted to let you know that that's a statewide change, and the governor has been putting that off. It was actually supposed to be implemented last year, but because of COVID, or for whatever reasons, they've been moving it back, and now COVID has caused it to be delayed till February 1st. And it was going to be delayed again, but the governor said no, he wants it implemented on February 1st. So that will be coming before the Planning Commission at the request of Clark Callett's Fire Rescue and our Townsend and Associate, who's our building consultant. So we need to get those changes in the code as soon as we possibly can. And so we wanted to give you a heads up, but we won't actually be asking you to review the individual changes because it's technically not within your purview. So please.
So we'll just have to adopt it. Also, that's the idea.
Yes, theoretically. And our code already says that we are obligated to implement the state standards, but our code also says that we delineate in sections which parts of that code are applicable. So even if we don't make the change, our building inspector and our plans examiner will still apply the 2018 codes, even though the Woodland Municipal Code still refers to the 2018s. So we're going to clean that up since we have to do it anyways. And then the other issue that's come up, and that is in 2018, we went through a round of multiple applications for code amendment process, code amendments, including the expansion of the urban growth boundary. And we had come up with 6 growth scenarios that ranged from making no changes to scenario number 5 was to expand our urban growth boundary down to the Lewis River on the east side of the railroad tracks. So all of the land south of Horseshoe Lake would be included in the urban growth boundary. And scenario 6 was that we would do the entire woodland bottoms in our urban growth boundary. And the idea was that we would do a master plan for the bottoms because the port owns a lot of land, plus Columbia River carbonates, plus it's fed by industrial rail, and there's a large amount of city industrial out west of the train tracks. So we advocated at the time that we should do a master plan and look at that entire area because it all filters through exit 21 and 22. So there are no trips in the bottoms that do not affect the city. And therefore our argument is we should have a planning conversation. And we had hoped that Cowlitz County would either do that themselves or that they would talk to us about expanding the urban growth boundary and do that master plan. And the council decided not to pursue that in 2018, but the issue has come around again. And one of the concerns that was raised was there are a lot of farmers in the bottoms who do not necessarily want to deal with the pressure from development if they're brought into the urban growth boundary. And my suggestion at the time had been that the city should adopt an agricultural zoning district, and the Ag 38 in the county would be a good model because the farmers in question are currently zoned Ag 38. So we were hoping by adopting their existing zoning that it would help them feel more confident that the city wasn't going to do a bait and switch and try and get them in the urban growth boundary so that we could turn around and pull the rug out from under their agricultural future. So I think that we should have a quick conversation about whether or not we should pursue the Ag 38. Look at the Ag 38, how we could incorporate that into city code. And having Jason on the planning commission might be very helpful right now, because you will be able to help us understand the pros and cons of the Ag 38 and how it ties into the rest of the county code, which we would not be adopting. And you might be able to help us carve that out of your code and put it into ours. So any thoughts on that?
Yes, I certainly could definitely will touch base with what we call our long range planning or policy and outreach department. They, aside from looking at updating some of our subdivision ordinances, there's interest in the urban growth boundary and our adjacent municipalities, in particular Woodland, and sort of the growth patterns and growth of the city of Woodland is on the county's radar. So I can definitely have that conversation with those powers and sort of shed some more light and information to the commission and the city of Woodland.
Tell you're
I
my
think-
surviving planning commission members from that effort. So any
Wow.
thoughts on how the ag, this is kind of the echo of that discussion that we started.
I was on the
Yeah.
tail end of that, and I think that some sort of ag zoning could only make it a little more palatable to those that are out there. I think it's a good idea, Travis.
Yeah, I think, in addition to making it more palatable to those folks, I think it's just a good idea. Because I think also, if we include, and this might be a comprehensive plan change as well, but if we include, an intention to preserve farmland in town and agricultural land and that economy and that character, I think that would probably, I don't know about probably, but that might potentially, also be more convincing. Because, like, quite frankly, folks are going to say, well, if you can change the zoning to this now, you can change it to something else later, right? Which is true. But if we have that, if we sort of enshrine it in our comp plan, and because I also just personally believe that that's really that's a strength of Woodland, and it's a resource that in a lot of towns our size is going away, and I think that's a tragedy right now, and I think it's going to be much more of a tragedy in the future, and something that we would live to regret. So, yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea to anything that would offer some protection or encouragement for agricultural practices, I think is great. And maybe, yeah, I don't know, maybe because there are also as long as we're talking about ag zoning, I assume ag 38 is talking about minimum size, 38 acre parcels. Is that right?
Yeah, minimum lot size requirement typically is 38 acres.
Okay. That seems relatively reasonable. I know, there are farms that are smaller than that are viable and operate well that could also potentially be advantageous. I don't know if that would if exploring different agricultural zones as well would be useful, or maybe that's, I don't know, picking nits at this point.
And Jason, looking at your code, I think there are four agricultural zones. There's the Ag 38, the Ag 1, the Ag, and the Ag Industrial. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I think part of the value of having this question or having this conversation is we might be able to create a hybrid of the four that makes the farmers in the bottom comfortable with being in our urban growth boundary, so that whether it's their ag worker housing or a cluster development that is attached to city services, so that we can increase our densities without having to destroy the large agricultural continuity that we currently enjoy out there. So
yeah, and I would also, I'd also expect pushback from the other side of, people who don't want to be hemmed in by this, who might, want the option to sell to a developer at some point too. So that's something to consider as well.
There's a section of RCW that caught my eye, and I wonder if any of the commissioners are familiar with it. I've just started looking into it, but it might help balance both preserving the agricultural area and that farm, feeling that the neighbors like, but also allow for some development, because there are farmers that are getting older and ready to retire, and their retirement plan is to develop some of their land. But I was looking at RCW 3670A 177, which is agricultural lands, innovative zoning techniques, accessory uses. And it caught my eye because it can be used by cities and counties, it says, and it allows for techniques like cluster zoning, sliding scale zoning, and quarter zoning, which would allow a large landowner to just develop a piece of their land and maybe have smaller 1 acre lots on a piece of their land, instead of having the big 5 acre lands or what becomes larger subdivisions, but just developing a small portion of their land at higher densities. So we could look in further, but I wonder if anyone has any experience with that or any thoughts.
Yeah, at least with Cowlitz County, there is a 1 acre exemption where we see that quite often, where they're allowed to subdivide an acre of their parcel, especially if it's familial or farm workers. It doesn't even have to be that, but we see that a lot as a little trend where they can just break off a 1 acre piece.
yeah, Jason, I don't know whether you were around for that, but I'll be the first to admit that I was kind of Godzilla walking through the bottoms in 2018 when we were having that discussion. But part of that was because Woodland had never had that conversation, and I recognized that we were laying the groundwork for what I thought was going to be 2021 when we were going to talk about updating our comprehensive plan. And by God, here we are 2 years later, and I have the port and the school district wanting to start the conversation about expanding the urban growth boundary. And it took exactly 2 years for it to come around through the game of telephone to where we started. So at least on the agency and the special districts, we're having that conversation. I'm not sure whether the county is going to be receptive to this conversation, but I think everybody has had a couple years to think about it, and I'm heartened to hear you talk about that you guys at the county are thinking about this as well, because if we can have this agriculture discussion and win over some of the pessimist farmers, we might actually have a table full of willing participants. And I think what's important is just because we are master planning the bottoms, it doesn't mean that our plan is to develop the entire bottoms. You know, the port is going to want to set aside a footprint because that's what they own and what they plan on using it for. But we don't want them planning in a vacuum, and the county planning in the vacuum, and Aho planning in a vacuum, and the city planning in a vacuum. The benefit of planning is you talk to your neighbors and you have a conversation. So hopefully that's where we're going. And I think while the county, we're going to be asking the county to consider urban growth boundary expansion, we will also be talking to the farmers about agricultural zoning. That might be a great way to kind of break the ice and get them to reconsider what's in their best interest in the long run. And they might, if we can convince them that planning is in their best interest in the long run, we will all be better off.
Yeah, I think, talking to them early and often is probably great. And Melissa, that RCW looks interesting. I was not familiar with it, but just, your description and reading it a little bit right now, it's I think there could be something in there for us. That'll be fun. I guess Brian did get the tail end of it, but Jason, you can look forward to packed meetings for once when we take this up.
Sure thing. Yeah. And Melissa, I can definitely sort of shepherd you to the right people. Definitely our policy and outreach group. They're really excited, and especially when it comes to collaborative planning. And I think this could be a model, and this should be the norm.
So
Yeah,
Jason, I may need to call you in your professional capacity to talk about pre-application applications and scheduling. So hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to you in the next day or two.
Sure thing. Looking forward to it.
And that's the end of my list. So unless you think of something else.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. So for the retooling the code stuff, I don't know, will you be accepting suggestions over the next week or so, couple weeks?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I should have thought about it before the meeting, but the one thing our December meeting, I know there were a couple of confusing bits in our PERD that, maybe that's for a later meeting, but if it seems like it's easy to clear some of that stuff up, that might be worth looking at. I know we don't get a lot of action on our PERD code, but I think it would be nice if we did. So maybe clarifying a couple of those sections.
Yeah.
Something to think about.
Yeah. So we have a big agenda for February. The shoreline stuff may move to March to meet Department of Ecology noticing, but we have a comp plan. Like I said, we had the Kirkland Senior Living comp plan zone change discussion in February. So the next time we could even possibly bring this back is March. So if you have any suggestions or any ideas.
So we got some time.
Yep.
Okay. Parking, get rid of
Travis,
parking minimums. Throw that on there. That's a retooling code issue, right?
Mhm.
Sorry, go on, Melissa.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I do remember that you wanted minimum parking, and so I think that would fit with retooling our code. So if you want to, if you could start us out with a couple ideas.
Okay.
And I'm glad you brought up PORD, because Travis, I was going to say, I think maybe we should add that to retooling our code while it's fresh in our mind. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, unless you want to tell us about code enforcement, I think that about wraps it up for the evening.
I'm not especially interested in code enforcement, but
Oh, well, code enforcement has been very quiet, knock on wood, for the last month or so. I haven't had any new complaints recently, which delights me.
All right. Fantastic. That's good to hear.
Yep.
All right. Anything else? Any last words from the commissioner staff? You're muted, Travis. You'll get the hang of this one day. You're on mute.
I will have the end of year report at the next meeting for community development.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, that'll be. Is it shaping up? I mean, I don't know. How'd it look like compared to 2019?
Yeah, so our permits that we reviewed, I think, is on the land use side, I think it's up. But on the building side, I think it's down. We only built 7 residences this year.
Wow.
Total new start construction on the residential side, and that just blows my mind. So the next, I think our 2 subdivisions will make up for that, like in the next first quarter of this year.
Yeah, yeah. Both those go ahead. That's going to be a lot. All right. Well, look forward to seeing that. And yeah, unless anybody's got something else to say, I think we can adjourn. So thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for all your work, staff, and have a lovely evening. And we'll see you next month.
Nice short meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, good work.
Thank you.
Thank you,
See you
everyone.
later,
Good to
everybody.
see you.
All right. Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Good night. Thank you.